Okay, today we're going to do our lecture on renewable energy as a comparison and contrast to our last lecture, which was on non-renewable energy sources. So first, by defining it, renewable energy is basically anything that we can make over and over again or rapidly create, no matter how much of them we actually end up using. So whether it's energy itself in one energy form that we convert to another, or if we're getting that energy out of some kind of matter that can be easily renewed. The idea is that once it's used up, it is not gone forever, and no matter how quickly or how rapidly it is used, that thing will always be available and always be able to come back. Now, if we compare and contrast non-renewables with items that are potentially renewable or renewable in the general sense, we already touched on how natural gas, oil, coal, and nuclear power is all non-renewable because we have finite amounts of those items. Things that are potentially renewable would be things like wood and biofuel, things that come from chemical energy inside plant matter. In this case, things like trees, or in biofuels case, if we're talking about ethanol, we're talking about corn oil, since we can regrow those things, but they're potentially renewable depending on how quickly they get used. But our true renewable sources of energy that we're never going to have to worry about running out of would be things like wind power, solar, hydroelectric, which takes advantage of moving water, not actually using water, and geothermal, which is the energy, heat energy coming out of the Earth's surface. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, whether it's renewable or non-renewable, sustainable energy use involves using less energy. So how can we use less energy? Well, we do need to conserve energy, meaning we need to find ways to use it less, no matter what kind of energy source we're talking about. And we also have to be more efficient with our energy use, meaning trying to use a smaller amount of energy to get the same result as we were previously doing. We see here there are things that we can do at home in terms of transportation and even our own electronics that will help with conserving energy and becoming more energy efficient, which in turn will allow our current energy sources to be used more in a longer period of time. So things like at the home in terms of weathering, in terms of reducing hot water use, transportation, things like carpooling, consolidating. For electronic devices, things that we'll talk about what the Energy Star label means, or even just unplugging devices when they're not being used, or using devices and appliances that use less energy in the long run. What this allows us to do is, there are certain benefits to it which allow people and companies to benefit from energy conservation and use. So a lot of energy companies, especially electricity companies, have to have backup energy available. If we were to conserve energy and efficiency, the companies would not have to worry about that as much. So one method that the companies use is with this variable price structure, where when demand is low, they actually charge less. When the demand is high, they actually charge more, which is simple economics. But conservation, a focus on conservation and efficiency would make this not have to be a worry, and eventually all energy would fall under low demand if that was the case. The other thing we can do with sustainability in terms of achieving energy sustainability is with sustainable design, basically doing things that can improve the efficiency of the buildings where we spend a large portion of our days, houses, schools, things like that. So the easiest way is what we call passive solar. So passive solar is basically designing particular things about a house or a building that take advantage of the sun's rays so that less electricity or less heating energy is used within that building. So some of the fundamentals of passive solar are what we call southern exposure, where the front of a house faces the southern point south on a compass. Having high particular insulations, and we'll look at what the insulation of a house looks like, adequate insulation, high efficiency windows that let light in but trap energy inside, front awnings which reduce the amount of incoming sunlight from summer sun, but when the winter sun is lower, it does penetrate through those windows. And passive solar does have a lot of really good benefits in terms of reducing home heating bills, and on a large scale that can eventually add up. So here we see what some of these things working together. So in the summer, the awning prevents a mass amount of that energy from sun's energy from getting into the house, meaning less energy is needed to cool it. In the winter, the double pane windows allow the winter's angle sunlight in, but the double pane windows trap the heat energy. Materials in the floor allow that that energy to stay trapped inside, and instead of they use what's called thermal mass. So items that are or building material that's specifically designed to keep heat in. Here we see, so this is a school building in San Francisco, California that takes advantage of a lot of passive solar design. Large glass windows with overhangs that block out sun during the summer times. The green roof helps insulate and also helps trap water, and there are also some solar panels on the roof itself as well. But it does take advantage of some of the designs, the building materials, the windows and things like that are basic tenets of passive solar, which reduce the energy need of this building and lower its energy cost. So when we look at this, we see that renewable energy can be broken down into things that specifically take advantage of the sun or things that don't take advantage of the sun. For the most part, the ones that we're going to be dealing with are all directly related to the sun in some way. The big ones we're going to focus on are solar, wind, hydroelectric, and geothermal. Geothermal is the only one that doesn't, and we'll title as part of hydroelectric, but it's slightly different in terms of where that energy is coming from. But you can see that a lot of energy sources rely on the sun because the sun itself is a big renewable source of energy, and transferring its energy to something else is a good stepping stone in terms of looking at where we can get the most energy from, where we don't have to worry about excessive use. So we'll start with biomass. So biomass is basically stuff that has the sun's energy trapped in it in the form of chemical energy in plants. Now, it's different from fossil fuels because when we talk about modern carbon versus fossil carbon. So people don't always understand why, well, if it's bad to burn coal, why is it not as bad to burn wood? The idea is that the carbon in wood is a natural amount of carbon in a particular area. It's not nearly as carbon dense. And when we burn it, we're taking carbon that was originally taken out of the atmosphere in the same lifespan that we're going to put it back in. The issue with burning fossilized carbon in the form of coal, oil, and natural gas is that carbon was taken out of the atmosphere millions of years ago, and now we're reintroducing it into the cycle. Burning something like wood or peat or anything like that, that carbon we're releasing was part of that same carbon cycle. The carbon we put into the atmosphere from fossil fuels was not part of that same carbon cycle. It was part of a different carbon cycle millions and millions of years ago. So we're adding excess carbon, which leads to a big buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So what do we mean with biomass? Wood, charcoal, which is petrified dried wood, manure even, ethanol, biodiesel, which are substitute fuels derived from corn instead of from fossil fuel. We could see here, the man here is preparing charcoal to be burned, so drying it out. We see here dead wood here can be used and harvested for burning to get heat energy. Hydroelectricity is another form of renewable energy. Basically, we take advantage of moving water. Moving water has kinetic energy because it is moving, and using that moving water to spin a turbine to generate electricity just takes advantage of the fact that water is there, it's moving. Now we're just taking advantage of its motion, whereas it might have normally passed through this area. By building a dam with a turbine and a generator, we can create electricity just from that natural movement of water. Now, there are some issues with building dams and hydroelectricity. Namely, the big one is going to be disruption of natural habitats, because we do have to create these reservoirs, and we do block up natural moving freshwater sources. So the problem there is that we are changing natural landscapes. We do flood areas in order to do this. But the benefit is we are getting clean electricity. So the different types of hydroelectrics, when we talk about dams, there's run-of-the-river, where the river itself is just moving, and we put a dam there. We don't stop the river from moving, we just take advantage of it. Water impoundment is like we would see here, where there's this intake can be opened or closed to varying degrees, whether more energy is needed to be generated or less, and they can control the flow of water. In a run-of-the-river system, there's no control over the flow of water. It's just constantly in motion. And then tidal is hydroelectric, but not driven by the sun, whereas warmer water and gravity move here. Now we're talking about the gravitational pull of the moon, which creates tides and the changing movement of waves, wave-driven systems. And tidal systems would basically just take advantage of those waves moving in and that moving wave water to spin a turbine to generate electricity. Now, when we think about directly capturing the sun's energy, we think active solar. So these are solar panels. The technical term is a photovoltaic cell or a PV cell. Seen here, we see a number of PV photovoltaic cells, all angled specifically to try and maximize the amount of sun's energy. Now, solar can be done two ways. It can be done for electricity, or it can be done from heat. In terms of sunlight, solar panel converts it to a DC current. The DC current, now this is one of the issues with efficiency, is that the solar panels right now can only convert the sun's energy into a DC current rather than an AC current. So direct current versus an alternating current. We use alternating currents to power our home electronics. So the fact is, it does have to be converted from DC to AC. But from there, once it is converted, obviously we lose some in terms of efficiency, but this is very clean. There's no burning of fossil fuels here, no adding of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, no pollution. So the electricity that is needed, the home takes in, and the rest is sent off and basically credited back, which is how a lot of houses and buildings make money off of solar panels, is that they use what they need to, and anything they don't use, they more or less sell back to the power companies in the form of credits on their bills. So rather than maybe paying $30 a month in terms of electricity, the solar panels provide your $30 a month, and then you get money back from the power company, maybe of, you say, an extra $10 a month, which is the benefit to adding solar panels, especially given the incentives that the government has and the tax deductions and rebates that you can get for that. Solar can also be used to heat water, where a pump, rather than having a hot water heater that a boiler itself, one of the ways that to help assist in the use of a boiler, rather than putting all the work on burning of fossil fuels or electricity coming from power plants, having solar collectors that heat water up by pumping water through the roofs past and behind these solar panels. The hot water is heated up, and then it's basically used to heat up water alongside the boiler to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that may be needed to create that hot water. If you have a gas boiler like I do in my house, or even an electric one, if it's electric, it's probably relying on coal right now, or natural gas, or nuclear in New Jersey to create that heat energy. So this does help alleviate the use of fossil fuels. Geothermal is another form. It's not common in our area. It's common in a lot of northern European places. This is a very common method of obtaining heat energy. Houses and things and pipes are built deeper into the ground that take advantage of natural hotspots, where heat itself is moving. The pipes themselves are buried deep in that rock where the heat itself can heat that water up and basically allow that heat to travel, that hot water to travel through and then be radiated out, as opposed to relying on electricity or other means to heat a home. It just takes advantage of the ground's natural heat. Very popular in northern European countries, think Iceland, Norway, Denmark, where you have a lot of active, I wouldn't say active volcano regions, but they're very popular areas for hotspots because geothermal activity is pretty high. Where we are, specifically in the U.S., geothermal activity is not very high. And then we also have wind energy. So wind energy is taking advantage of the kinetic energy of the wind. And wind is basically just created by uneven heating of the Earth's surface. So the sun heats the air, hot air moves over the cold air moves under the hot air, and that basically is what wind is. So a wind turbine basically just captures that. The blades capture that kinetic energy from that moving air and convert it into electrical energy. So your typical wind turbine can be spun around in different directions to maximize the amount of wind that the blades will catch. The blades catch the wind, turns the gearbox, which spins inside the generator, converting that mechanical energy to electricity, just like all of our other power sources do. And again, no fossil fuels, no burning of materials, no adding carbon dioxide or pollutants to the atmosphere. Lastly, hydrogen fuel cells. Hydrogen, mentioned in non-renewable, hydrogen has as another means of nuclear power, because now we're talking about fission and not fusion. So basically what we do is hydrogen molecules get split into ions. The protons basically cross a membrane, and the electrons themselves are attracted to them. So the electrons that are split off of that hydrogen basically run through a system that collects them, which is our electricity, and your end result is, in the presence of oxygen, which is readily available in the air, the formation of water. So basically, hydrogen itself is split. The electrons run through a battery, which charges them, because those moving electrons are electricity. It comes back together with the hydrogen ions, the electrons, and oxygen form water together, so your only byproduct of a hydrogen fuel cell is water. The big issue with hydrogen fuel cells right now is trying to contain that energy in a small space on a reasonable level. Hydrogen is also very dangerous in terms of its explosive nature. Hydrogen gas is very flammable, so there are some concerns there. This is taken out of your book in Chapter 13. I apologize for not being able to fit it any better on one particular slide, but it is definitely worth taking a note of, getting your textbooks and copying down at some point into a nice chart, specifically because it does list all the advantages and disadvantages, the pollution, electricity costs, returns on energy investments, and really does a good job at explaining what these differences, the different benefits and costs are for all these different renewable energy sources. So that wraps up energy, and we'll get a chance to focus on and look at some of the different ways that these renewable energy sources interact with each other and work over the course of the next week.